The alien princess
Se
pointed at me
atre.
and said to her
Entoin.
friend, "That's my husband," and smiled. Ethan
Hänestä
stepped
mietin,
off the shuttle onto the soft, glowing surface of Zyphora, his eyes widening at the sight before him. The air shimmered faintly, as if charged with life, carrying the scent of strange flowers that glowed under the twin moons. Towering crystal structures stretched toward the sky, reflecting light in dazzling patterns. He had traveled across countless worlds before, but nothing had prepared him for the palace of Zyphora. Even in holovids, it had seemed grand, but seeing it in person was breathtaking. Every building floated a little above the ground, supported by beams of light, and the gardens between them swirled with colors he had never seen on Earth. Creatures with wings and scales moved gracefully, their movements perfectly synchronized with the floating lanterns above them. Ethan adjusted his uniform nervously. He was here as a diplomat, tasked with negotiating peace and trade agreements, but the sheer grandeur of the place made him feel like a small child in a museum. A Zyphorian attendant approached him, tall and elegant, with skin that shimmered like silver. "Welcome, human." "The princess awaits," the attendant said in a melodic voice, bowing slightly. Ethan nodded, trying to hide his nervousness. The hallways of the palace were vast and airy. Light bounced off the walls in soft arcs, illuminating murals of Zyphorian history. Ethan walked carefully, aware that every step was being observed. He had been warned that Zyphorians were proud and cautious of outsiders. One wrong move could end negotiations before they began. And yet, there was an undercurrent of curiosity in the palace, as if the walls themselves wanted to see how a human would behave. He was led into a wing he had not expected, a private garden where glowing vines hung from the ceilings, and pools of water reflected the moonlight. At the center of the garden stood a figure that seemed almost unreal, Princess Lyra. She was taller than he expected, her skin a soft shade of blue with faint patterns that glimmered when she moved. Her eyes, large and almond-shaped, were filled with curiosity, and her expression was playful rather than royal. Around her, a few attendants whispered quietly, observing the interaction. Lyra's gaze met Ethan's, and she smiled, a small, knowing smile that caught him off guard. "You must be the human I've heard so much about," she said, her voice gentle but confident. Ethan's throat went dry. He had expected formality, maybe suspicion, but not this, warmth. Yes," he replied, bowing slightly. "I am Ethan." "It's an honor to meet you, Princess." He realized immediately that the words sounded stiff, too formal. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Ethan," she repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Simple, strong. Tell me, what is Earth like?" "Is it as strange as Zyphora seems to me?" Ethan blinked. No one had ever asked him to describe Earth in such an open, curious way. Usually, humans' worlds were taken for granted or misunderstood by alien races. "It's varied," he began cautiously. "Forests, oceans, deserts, mountains. People of different colors and languages, working, laughing, sometimes fighting, but mostly trying to understand each other." Lyra's eyes lit up. "Trying to understand. That is very rare in my experience. Most humans I have met are either conquerors or traders. You seem different." Ethan felt a warmth spread through him at her words. "I try to be," he said softly. She laughed lightly, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "We shall see," she said. "Come, I will show you something." She led him further into the garden, where a small platform hovered above a pool of glowing water. Lily-like flowers floated on the surface, emitting soft lights. "These are Zyphora's memory blossoms," she explained. "They capture moments of joy. When they bloom fully, they show a scene from the past." Ethan leaned closer, fascinated. A blossom shimmered, and the water glowed, forming the image of a young Zyphorian playing with a small creature he had never seen before. It moved with grace and happiness, a private memory captured in light. Ethan couldn't help but smile. "They remember happiness?" he asked. "Yes," Lyra replied. Even in times of sorrow, they bloom if the heart holds joy. Do humans have such things? Some, I think so, Ethan said. He remembered small crystal charms his grandmother had kept, each one marking a happy moment in her life. We have mementos, photographs, letters, little objects. They remind us of what matters most. Lyra nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps humans are not so different from Xiphorians after all. For the next hour, they wandered through the garden. Lyra explained Xiphorian traditions, their festivals, and their games. Ethan shared stories of Earth, of simple joys like watching rain fall, tasting new foods, and walking among crowds of strangers. She laughed at some stories, frowned thoughtfully at others, and occasionally asked questions that made him think harder than he had in months. By the time the sun began to set, Ethan realized that the attendants had quietly left them alone. The garden glowed in golden hues, the flowers reflecting the fading light. He felt a strange mix of awe and comfort, as if he had been invited into a secret corner of the universe that only he could see. Lyra paused by the edge of a floating walkway, looking down at the shimmering city below. "You are not afraid, Ethan." Most humans would be intimidated by this place. By me, Ethan shook his head. "I've been afraid of many things," he admitted. "But I've learned that fear doesn't teach you much. Curiosity teaches everything." Her smile widened. "Curiosity is good. And courage, that too, is rare." She tilted her head. "I feel curious about you, Ethan, perhaps more than I should." Ethan swallowed. There was an honesty in her eyes that made it impossible to look away. "I feel curious about you as well, Princess," he said quietly. For a moment the world seemed to stop. The glowing vines, the floating pools, the distant sounds of the palace, all faded into the background. Two beings from completely different worlds were standing together, simply observing one another, discovering the possibilities of trust and friendship. Lyra finally laughed, a soft, musical sound that seemed to echo in the garden. "Come, I will introduce you to my friends. They may not understand why you are here, but I think they will like you." As they walked toward a group of young Xiphorian nobles gathered near a fountain, Ethan felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He knew that being seen in the palace was one thing, but being accepted by the princess's friends would be another. Still, he trusted Lyra. She had chosen to bring him here, and that alone was a rare honor. When they reached the group, Lyra gestured to him with a bright smile. "This is Ethan," she said. "He is my guest, and I hope soon my friend." The other Xiphorians looked him over, some with curiosity, some with skepticism. A tall female with silver-blue skin stepped forward. "You are human?" she asked, her tone polite but cautious. "Yes," Ethan replied, bowing slightly. "I am honored to meet you." Lyra stepped closer to him, subtly shielding him with her presence. "He is more than that," she said firmly. "He is curious, brave, and kind. That is enough to be my friend." The group exchanged glances, and though a few were still skeptical, most nodded slowly. Ethan realized that this simple act, Lyra's defense, was far more powerful than any ceremony or title. In a world where humans were often underestimated, one alien princess's trust felt like a bridge across the galaxy. As the evening wore on, they played games, shared stories, and laughed in ways Ethan had never imagined possible. The palace, once intimidating and vast, began to feel smaller, warmer, and strangely like home. By the time the twin moons rose high into the sky, Ethan understood that this encounter was only the beginning. Something significant was growing between him and Lyra, something that neither time nor distance could easily break. And somewhere deep in his chest, Ethan felt the first stirrings of a connection that might change not just his life, but the future of Xiphora itself. After the evening in the garden, Ethan found himself walking through the palace corridors with Princess Lyra by his side. Unlike the first day, the halls no longer seemed intimidating. The shimmering walls reflected the soft glow of floating lanterns, and Ethan had begun to notice the small details. the intricate carvings on doors, the faint hum of energy flowing through the palace, and the delicate scent of flowers that lingered even in indoor halls. Lyra walked with a light step, her presence both commanding and gentle. She spoke freely, asking questions about Earth, about humans, and about Ethan himself. "On your planet, do you all live in large cities like this palace?" she asked, curiosity dancing in her eyes. "Some do," Ethan replied. "Many people live in big cities with tall buildings and many lights, but there are also forests, rivers, and deserts where few people live. Life is very different depending on where you are." Lyra's gaze drifted to the floating windows, where the twin moons hung in the sky, reflecting on the palace pools below. "It sounds peaceful and wild at the same time. That is rare. On Zyphora, most of our cities are controlled, organized. There is beauty but little surprise." Ethan smiled. "Maybe that is why humans enjoy exploring. We want to see what is beyond the walls we know." Lyra laughed softly. "Curiosity again. It seems your species is full of it. I wonder if it is bravery or foolishness." "It can be both," Ethan admitted. "Sometimes you only find out which one it is after you try." Their walk led them to a vast hall filled with holographic displays of Zyphorian history. Ethan marveled at the images, battles, festivals, explorers charting unknown planets. But he noticed that Lyra's attention was on the smaller moments. Children playing in gardens, families sharing meals, celebrations of music and dance. "These are the moments our history often forgets," she said quietly. "Most people focus on power, conquests, politics, but the real life, the happiness, is in these small memories. That is why I like the memory blossoms. They remember joy even when the world tries to forget it." Ethan nodded, feeling a strange connection to her words. "I understand. On Earth, people often forget what matters most. They focus on war, on money, on politics. But the small things, those are what stay in your heart." Lyra glanced at him with a soft smile. "You think like a philosopher, or maybe you just see the world differently. That is rare for a human." For the next few days, Ethan was invited to several palace activities. He attended banquets where food floated on small levitating trays, watched Zyphorian music performances where instruments played themselves through light and sound, and even joined training exercises. Not for combat, but for coordination and agility. Lyra guided him through each experience, laughing at his mistakes and praising his successes. The palace staff began to notice the unusual closeness between the princess and the human. Some whispered that Ethan's manners were impeccable, his questions thoughtful, and his respect for Zyphorian culture genuine. Others were suspicious, unsure how a human could gain such trust in so little time, but Lyra's confidence in him never wavered. One afternoon, they walked through a section of the palace called the Crystal Terrace, a place where the air sparkled with suspended energy crystals. The view was breathtaking. Mountains covered in glowing flora stretched into the horizon, rivers of liquid light meandered through valleys, and distant creatures flew gracefully in synchronized patterns. "Do humans have places like this?" Lyra asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Not exactly," Ethan replied. "We have mountains and forests, rivers and lakes, but nothing that glows like this naturally. We have cities that light up at night, but it is artificial. It is beautiful, but not alive in the same way." Lyra's eyes softened. "I like that. You notice beauty even when it is simple. Most of my people see only grandeur and rules. You see life." They sat on a floating bench, suspended by light above the terrace pools. Ethan could feel a calmness he had not experienced in months. Here he was not a diplomat negotiating complex agreements. He was simply a man talking to a princess, learning about her world and sharing his own. "Do you ever wish you could see Earth?" Lyra asked. "I mean truly see it, not through books or holovids." "Every day," Ethan admitted. "I love Zyphora, but Earth is my home. Its forests, its oceans, even its storms. There is beauty in struggle and joy in simple moments. I wish I could show it to you someday. Lyra considered this, her expression thoughtful. Perhaps one day you will, and perhaps one day I will see if your world is as beautiful as you describe. The days passed and their bond deepened. They shared quiet conversations in hidden gardens, explored hidden alcoves of the palace, and even played simple games that allowed them to laugh freely. Ethan noticed that Lyra's laughter was not reserved for him alone. It had a ripple effect, making those around her smile as well. But with him, it was different. It was sincere, unguarded, and it made him feel understood. Despite their growing closeness, there were still whispers of tension in the palace. Some members of the council did not trust a human so near the princess. They plotted subtle tests, observing Ethan's reactions, looking for mistakes, and trying to determine if he was a threat. But Ethan, unaware of much of this scrutiny, focused on learning and understanding Zyphoria. One evening, Lyra took him to a chamber filled with hanging crystals that produced sound when the air moved. The music was soft, harmonious, and unlike anything Ethan had ever heard. "This is the Chamber of Echoes," she explained. "Every sound, every word spoken here becomes part of the music. It is a reflection of our thoughts and emotions." Ethan tried to speak, unsure what to say. When he finally whispered a simple greeting, the crystals responded, creating a melody that wrapped around them. Lyra laughed softly. "Even your words have a harmony. You bring balance, Ethan. That is rare." "You make it easy," he replied, smiling. "You make this place less intimidating." She tilted her head, her eyes shining. "Maybe that is because I want it to be less intimidating. Maybe because I like having you here." Ethan's heart skipped a beat, but he smiled and nodded. "I like being here too." More than I expected. As the week went on, Ethan noticed more subtle things. How Lyra interacted with her friends, how she balanced duty with freedom, and how her gaze sometimes lingered on him longer than necessary. He realized that this was no longer just curiosity. A mutual respect and trust were growing between them, quiet but undeniable. One day, they were walking near a floating lake when a small creature with iridescent wings landed near them. Lyra bent down to pet it, her touch gentle and sure. "These creatures are shy," she said. "Most humans would frighten them, but you do not." Ethan crouched to observe the creature, careful not to scare it. "I like animals," he said simply. "They sense intentions. If you are kind, they respond." Lyra smiled, clearly impressed. "Perhaps that is why I like you, Ethan. You are kind, patient, and curious, qualities my people rarely see in humans." By the end of the week, Ethan felt he had learned more about Zyphora than he could have imagined. He had been invited into hidden gardens, observed rituals, and shared meals with the royal family. But the most significant part of his experience was the bond forming between him and Lyra. It was subtle, growing in quiet moments, in shared laughter, in mutual respect. And Lyra, for her part, was discovering that a human could bring a perspective unlike any she had known. His ideas, his humility, and his willingness to see life differently intrigued her. She found herself thinking of him often, wondering what he saw when he looked at Zyphora, wondering if he would ever look at her the way he saw the world, with honesty, curiosity, and respect. The palace had become more than a place of duty and grandeur. It had become a space for connection, understanding, and discovery. Ethan and Lyra's friendship was growing, quietly but firmly, bridging the gap between two worlds. And though neither fully understood where it would lead, both knew that their time together was changing them, shaping possibilities for the future that neither of them could have anticipated. The sun set behind the glowing mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Ethan and Lyra stood side by side on the terrace, watching the reflections ripple across the floating pools. For the first time since he had arrived, Ethan felt a sense of belonging, a feeling that perhaps, in this vast universe, he had found someone who could truly see him. And Lyra felt a spark of excitement. realizing that this human was unlike any ally, friend, or companion she had ever known. Their bond was still young, but it was strong enough to withstand whispers, doubts, and palace intrigue. And as the stars appeared in the sky, Ethan and Lyra walked back toward the palace, side by side, ready to face whatever the next day might bring. Together, Ethan had been at the palace for several weeks now, and he felt more comfortable navigating its halls, gardens, and terraces. The palace staff had grown used to his presence, though not all were convinced of his value. Some members of the council remained skeptical, watching him with thinly veiled suspicion, while others quietly admired his humility and ability to adapt. But Ethan paid little attention to whispers. His focus remained on understanding Zyphora, its people, and Princess Lyra. Lyra, for her part, seemed to grow more confident each day. She had begun to include Ethan in her daily routines, from attending council meetings as an observer to exploring hidden corridors of the palace that even most nobles had never seen. Their friendship had deepened, built on laughter, curiosity, and shared discoveries. Yet behind the palace walls, tension simmered. Some council members resented the idea of a human so close to the princess, fearing it might influence decisions or threaten their authority. One morning, Ethan was summoned by the palace steward, a tall Zyphorian with sharp features and a stern expression. "Ethan," the steward said formally, "the council has decided to test your loyalty and bravery. You will undertake a mission to the Crimson Expanse. Your actions there will determine whether you are worthy of continued proximity to the princess." Ethan felt a mix of surprise and determination. He had expected challenges in diplomacy, but a direct test of courage was unexpected. "I accept," he said calmly. "Tell me what I must do." The steward handed him a scroll with maps, warnings, and instructions. The Crimson Expanse was a vast, uncharted territory, dangerous and unpredictable. Few had ventured there and returned, and it was said to contain ancient Zyphorian relics, hidden traps, and strange wildlife. Ethan studied the maps carefully, noting the landmarks and hazards marked by the council. "I will prepare immediately," he said. When he mentioned the mission to Lyra, she looked concerned but not fearful. "Be careful, Ethan," she said softly. "Many have underestimated the expanse. You must rely on your mind and heart as much as your strength." "I will," he replied, "and I will return safely." "You have my word." The next day, Ethan set out with a small team of Zyphorian guards. They traveled through floating bridges, crystalline caves, and dense forests that shimmered in unnatural light. The expanse was unlike any place Ethan had ever seen. The ground seemed to shift beneath his feet, and glowing plants emitted a soft hum that resonated in his chest. Strange creatures peeked from behind rocks and vines, their eyes reflecting curiosity and caution. Despite the dangers, Ethan remained calm. He relied on observation, careful steps, and thoughtful decisions. When a narrow path collapsed into a glowing chasm, he quickly directed the guards to safety, finding an alternate route. When a creature blocked their path, he observed its behavior, slowly moving his hand and speaking softly until it stepped aside. The Zyphorian guards watched in amazement. Few humans had shown such composure in the expanse. Hours turned into days as they navigated deeper into the territory. Ethan solved puzzles left by ancient Zyphorians, deciphering symbols that guided them through hidden paths. The team faced natural obstacles, floating rock formations, sudden waterfalls of light, and areas where gravity shifted unpredictably. Through it all, Ethan remained calm, encouraging the guards and making decisions that kept them safe. One evening, as they rested beside a glowing river, Ethan noticed an ancient structure partially submerged in the water. The scroll had mentioned a royal artifact hidden in the expanse, and he suspected this was the location. Carefully, he approached, studying the inscriptions on the walls. They depicted a story of a Zyphorian hero who had bridged worlds with courage and wisdom. Ethan traced the symbols with his fingers, deciphering the clues. The artifact was a small, crystalline device that pulsed with energy. Ethan lifted it carefully, feeling a subtle warmth and power emanate from within. It was delicate yet strong, a symbol of the Xiphorian legacy. He turned to the guards, who nodded in respect. They had seen many trials, but never someone faced them with such clarity and restraint. When they began the journey back to the palace, Ethan felt a mixture of relief and pride. He had navigated the expanse, preserved the artifact, and ensured the safety of his companions. But more than that, he had proven something to himself, that courage and careful thought could overcome even the most daunting challenges. Upon their return, the palace erupted in whispers. The council observed Ethan carefully, noting his composure, intelligence, and bravery. Many were impressed despite themselves. Some could not hide their astonishment. Lyra met him at the gates, her eyes shining with relief and admiration. "You returned," she said softly, almost as if she couldn't believe it. "I promised I would," Ethan replied. "And I always keep my promises." Lyra smiled, her expression radiant. "I am proud of you, Ethan. You faced what few would dare, and you returned with strength, wisdom, and humility. That is rare." The council formally acknowledged his success, though some remained wary. They could not deny that Ethan had passed the test with distinction. His calm thinking, bravery, and respect for Xiphorian ways had impressed even the harshest skeptics. Lyra's confidence in him, already strong, had only grown. She began to involve him more directly in discussions, seeking his perspective on matters both small and significant. As days passed, Ethan and Lyra spent more time together, exploring the palace and surrounding areas. They visited the memory gardens, where blossoms recorded joyful moments, and the crystal library, where light itself stored knowledge. Ethan shared Earth stories, and Lyra showed him Xiphoria's hidden wonders. With each experience, their bond deepened, built on respect, trust, and growing affection. One afternoon, as they walked along a floating terrace overlooking a glowing valley, Lyra spoke quietly. "You handled the expanse with more courage than most Xiphorians. You do not fear what you do not know. That is unusual for humans." Ethan chuckled softly. "Maybe humans are more curious than you think. We face the unknown because we want to learn, not just to survive." Lyra looked at him thoughtfully. "Curiosity and bravery together, that is powerful, and it is why I trust you." They continued their walk in comfortable silence, the air filled with the hum of energy crystals and distant calls of glowing creatures. Ethan realized that he had come to care deeply for this alien princess, not for her title or position, but for her mind, her laughter, and her unique perspective on life. Lyra, too, felt a connection she had never expected. Ethan's courage, humility, and curiosity had won her trust in a way that no other ally or potential suitor ever had. One evening, they attended a banquet together, surrounded by nobles and dignitaries. Ethan remained calm, conversing politely with guests, answering questions about Earth, and listening to Xiphorian perspectives. He noticed how Lyra observed him, her expression one of quiet pride and admiration. It was subtle, almost hidden, but Ethan felt it nonetheless. After the banquet, they retreated to a quiet garden. Lyra leaned against a glowing tree, her eyes reflecting the lights of the palace. "You have changed many minds," she said softly. "Even those who doubted you, they cannot ignore your strength and wisdom." "I only acted as I believed was right," Ethan replied. "I did not seek to prove anything. I only wanted to do my best." Lyra smiled. "And that is what makes you remarkable. Most act for recognition. You act for understanding, for kindness, for respect. That is why I trust you completely." Ethan felt warmth spread through him. He had not come to Xiphora seeking admiration, yet he had earned something far more valuable: trust, respect, and the beginnings of a deep bond with a remarkable princess. As the night deepened, they stood together under the twin moons, the palace glowing softly around them. Ethan realized that his journey had only just begun. The expanse had tested his courage, but the palace and its people were now teaching him about connection, trust, and the subtle power of empathy. Lyra, standing beside him, was discovering that a human could inspire more than curiosity or respect. He could inspire hope, loyalty, and perhaps something even deeper. Their friendship had passed trials, faced scrutiny, and emerged stronger. The connection between them was no longer casual. It was real, tangible, and quietly transformative. And though neither could predict the future, both knew that their growing bond would shape the days to come, altering not just their own lives but the possibilities for all who lived within the palace walls. The stars twinkled overhead, mirrored by the glowing pools below. Ethan and Lyra walked side by side, two beings from entirely different worlds, bound by trust, curiosity, and the first stirrings of a bond that neither time nor distance could easily sever. And in that moment, both understood that the story they were beginning was unlike any either had experienced, a story of courage, connection, and the quiet power of understanding. The days following Ethan's successful return from the Crimson Expanse were filled with a mixture of celebration, curiosity, and quiet tension. The palace corridors buzzed with whispers as nobles and attendants alike discussed the unusual human who had faced the expanse and returned unscathed. Some admired him openly, while others frowned at the growing trust the princess placed in him. Ethan, however, paid little attention to gossip, focusing instead on learning more about Xiphorian culture and spending time with Princess Lyra. Lyra had become more open, confident, and playful in her interactions with him. She guided him through ceremonial halls he had not yet visited, teaching him about the symbols, rituals, and histories that shaped her world. Ethan listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that impressed even the senior palace scholars. His humility and curiosity seemed to disarm many who had initially doubted him. One morning, Lyra invited Ethan to the Hall of Reflections, a vast chamber with walls of crystal that mirrored the sky outside. The light from the twin moons filled the room, casting patterns of silver and blue across the polished floor. "Today, you will meet my closest friends," Lyra said with a smile. "They are curious about you, but I trust them to understand why I value your presence." Ethan's heart raced slightly. Though he had been in the palace for weeks, meeting Lyra's inner circle felt different. These were the people she confided in, the ones who influenced her decisions, and their approval mattered greatly. The group of Xiphorian nobles waited near the center of the chamber, their expressions a mix of curiosity, caution, and surprise. Lyra walked confidently toward them, her hand brushing lightly against Ethan's arm in a subtle gesture of reassurance. "Friends," she began, her voice calm yet commanding, "I want you to meet Ethan. He has come from a distant world, not seeking power, not seeking fame, but seeking understanding." Ethan bowed respectfully. "It is an honor to meet you all," he said, keeping his voice steady. He could feel the weight of their gazes, some studying him intently, others with guarded suspicion. One of Lyra's closest friends, a tall Xiphorian named Myra, stepped forward. Her silver-blue skin shimmered in the moonlight, and her eyes were sharp yet thoughtful. "You are human," she said, her tone neutral. "Many humans are unpredictable. Why should we trust you?" Ethan met her gaze calmly. "I cannot ask for your trust immediately. I can only show it through my actions, my respect for your world, and my commitment to what is right." "I hope that is enough." Lyra smiled, her eyes bright. "It is more than enough. You have faced challenges that would test even the strongest of Xiphorians. Your courage, wisdom, and kindness speak for themselves." The group murmured among themselves, clearly surprised by her words. Ethan realized that Lyra's confidence in him carried weight beyond his understanding. She was not only a princess, but a voice of authority that few dared question. The nobles began to ask questions about Earth, Ethan's experiences, and his understanding of Xiphorian culture. He answered each honestly, sharing stories of exploration, learning, and the values he held dear. Lyra occasionally added details, explaining his thoughtfulness and the respect he showed to all beings, Xiphorian or otherwise. By the end of the afternoon, Ethan could sense a shift. Some of the skeptics were softened by his sincerity, others intrigued by his perspective, and a few remained cautious but no longer openly hostile. Lyra's trust had created a bridge between them, one built on mutual respect and admiration. As evening approached, the palace prepared for a grand banquet in honor of Ethan's achievements. The main hall was adorned with floating lanterns, colorful tapestries, and tables filled with foods that shimmered and floated before the guests. Musicians played gentle melodies that filled the air with harmony, and the scent of exotic flowers mingled with the aromas of the feast. Ethan walked beside Lyra as they entered the hall. Her hand brushed his lightly, and he felt a surge of warmth. "Tonight," she said softly, "is not just about celebration. It is about recognition. I want you to know that your actions, your courage, and your character matter deeply to me and to this palace." Ethan felt a mix of gratitude and nervousness. Recognition was one thing, but Lyra's words carried a weight he could not ignore. "I am honored," he said simply. During the banquet, guests approached Ethan, asking questions about Earth, his travels, and his views on diplomacy. He answered thoughtfully, careful to show respect for Xiphorian traditions. Lyra watched him, her expression a mixture of pride and amusement. She noticed the subtle ways he engaged with others, his attentiveness, patience, and genuine interest in understanding. As the evening progressed, Lyra stood and raised her hand, drawing the attention of the entire hall. The music softened, and all conversation ceased. Every eye turned toward the princess, whose presence commanded the room effortlessly. "Friends, honored guests," Lyra began, her voice clear and confident. "Tonight, we celebrate not just achievements but trust, courage, and understanding. And I want to recognize someone who embodies these qualities in a way that has changed my perspective and the perspective of this palace." The nobles murmured quietly, curious as Lyra turned toward Ethan. She raised her hand and pointed directly at him. "This is Ethan," she declared, her voice steady and warm. "He has come from a distant world, faced trials that few could endure, and proven himself with wisdom, bravery, and respect. And more importantly," she paused, letting the moment settle over the hall, "he is my husband." A stunned silence fell across the hall. The noble's eyes widened, whispers of surprise and disbelief rippling through the crowd. Ethan froze for a moment, unsure if he had heard correctly. Lyra's smile, calm and radiant, reassured him. She had made her choice, and there was no doubt in her declaration. Some of the council members tried to speak, but Lyra raised her hand, her gaze unwavering. "This is not a question," she said firmly. "It is my choice. He is my partner, my equal, and my confidant. Those who doubt will have to see his actions and character before questioning his place here." The room was silent for a long moment, and then the nobles slowly began to nod, some with reluctance, others with genuine admiration. Ethan felt a mixture of awe and disbelief. The princess's words had shifted the atmosphere completely. What had been suspicion and doubt now became acknowledgement and even respect. Lyra approached him, her hand brushing his arm again. "You see," she whispered softly, "I trust you, and I will always defend my choice." Ethan smiled, his heart full. I don't know what to say," he admitted. "Say nothing," Lyra replied, her eyes shining. "Actions are worth more than words." The remainder of the evening passed in celebration. Guests approached Ethan, offering congratulations and gestures of goodwill. Some spoke quietly, acknowledging his bravery and character. Others watched cautiously, still adjusting to the idea of a human so close to the princess. But through it all, Ethan remained calm, humble, and thoughtful, just as Lyra had come to know him. After the banquet, Lyra led Ethan to a quiet garden terrace overlooking the palace. The twin moons reflected on the floating pools below, and the air was filled with the soft hum of nocturnal creatures. "You have changed more than minds tonight," Lyra said softly. "You have shown courage, patience, and wisdom. And you have shown that trust is earned, not given lightly." Ethan looked out over the terrace, feeling a sense of peace he had never known. "I did what I thought was right," he said quietly. "I never sought recognition, but your trust means more than I can say." Lyra smiled, her gaze warm. "Then let that be enough. We will face the future together, and I know you will continue to show the strength and wisdom that brought you here." They stood in silence, side by side, watching the reflections ripple across the pools. Ethan realized that he had not only survived the expanse, but had also gained something far more significant: a place of trust and respect in a world that was not his own, and the companionship of a princess whose insight, courage, and spirit matched his own. As the night deepened, the palace quieted, leaving only the soft glow of lanterns and the distant hum of the city. Ethan and Lyra walked back through the corridors, side by side, their steps light and synchronized. The bond between them had grown stronger than ever, tested by trials and affirmed by trust. In that moment, Ethan understood something profound: that true partnership was not about titles, duties, or appearances. It was about trust, understanding, and shared respect. And as he glanced at Lyra, smiling softly, he knew that the story they had begun together was only just unfolding, a story that would shape not only their lives but the future of Sci-Fi itself. The palace, with all its grandeur, mysteries, and challenges, had become more than a place of duty. It was a space where two beings from entirely different worlds could meet, connect, and change each other. And as the stars twinkled above, mirrored by the glowing pools below, Ethan and Lyra walked forward together, ready to face whatever awaited them, united by courage, trust, and an unspoken promise of partnership. The morning after the grand banquet, the palace was alive with whispers and speculation. The nobles and attendants discussed the princess's bold declaration late into the night, some in admiration, others in quiet disbelief. Ethan walked through the palace corridors with Lyra at his side, noticing how the atmosphere had shifted. Where there had been suspicion, now there was cautious respect. Where there had been doubt, now there was curiosity about this human who had so quickly become an integral part of Zyphoria. Lyra guided Ethan through the palace gardens, pointing out areas where she had grown up, places she had visited only with her closest friends. "This palace," she said softly, "is more than walls and rules. It is our history, our memories, our stories. And now part of it includes you." Ethan felt a warmth spread through him. "I don't know if I truly belong here," he admitted, "but I promise I will do my best to honor your trust in the palace." Lyra smiled. "Belonging is not just about titles or birth. It is about heart, mind, and actions. You already belong in the ways that matter most." Over the next few days, Ethan found himself immersed in palace life more than ever. He attended council discussions, observing the debates on trade, exploration, and cultural exchange. Though he was still a human outsider, the council members began to see the wisdom in his words. He offered perspectives grounded in Earth's experiences, emphasizing curiosity, cooperation, and understanding. Slowly, the palace began to embrace the idea that a human could contribute meaningfully to Zyphoria's governance, not through authority, but through insight and character. Lyra watched these interactions closely, noticing the subtle ways Ethan gained respect. She saw how he listened carefully, asked questions that revealed depth, and offered solutions that balanced logic with empathy. For her, it was a confirmation of why she had chosen him, not for his strength or status, but for the integrity and heart that guided his every action. One afternoon, they visited the Hall of Eternal Light, a chamber where crystalline walls reflected sun and moonlight simultaneously, creating a tapestry of color and energy. Lyra led Ethan to a floating platform at the center, where the air shimmered with gentle pulses of light. This place, she explained, is where we reflect on choices, on growth, and on the future. I want you to see it because you are part of my future now. Ethan looked around, awe evident in his eyes. It's incredible, he said softly. It feels alive, as if the walls themselves hold memories and hope. Lyra smiled. That is exactly it. And now your presence adds new layers to that tapestry. Your courage, your kindness, and your understanding are part of this palace's story. They spent hours in the Hall of Eternal Light, speaking quietly about the future of Zyphoria, the possibilities of collaboration with other worlds, and the values they both cherished. Ethan shared stories of Earth's diverse cultures, its triumphs and struggles, while Lyra explained the nuances of Zyphoria's traditions, emphasizing harmony, empathy, and balance. Together, they imagined a future where their worlds could learn from one another, where trust and curiosity bridged the vast distances between stars. As the days passed, the nobles began to approach Ethan more openly, seeking his counsel and engaging in discussions he had never expected to lead. Some still carried skepticism, but most were won over by his humility, wisdom, and the quiet confidence Lyra displayed by his side. It became clear that their partnership was not just a personal bond, but a force that could influence the palace and the wider realm of Zyphoria. One evening, Lyra invited Ethan to the terrace gardens, a place where floating lanterns glimmered like stars above a reflective pool. She handed him a small blossom, its petals shimmering with soft light. "This is a memory blossom," she explained. "It captures a moment of true joy. I want you to have it because you have brought joy, trust, and courage into this palace." Ethan held the blossom carefully, feeling its warmth. I don't know what to say," he admitted. "I came here to learn, not to be honored, but this means more than I can express." Lyra smiled warmly. "You don't need to say anything. Actions are always worth more than words, and your actions have already spoken louder than anyone could imagine." As they walked together through the glowing gardens, Ethan realized how deeply connected he had become to this world and to Lyra. He had come as an outsider, a visitor from a distant planet, yet he had found trust, friendship, and a place of belonging. Lyra, in turn, had discovered someone who saw her not just as a princess, but as a person, someone who respected her, listened to her, and matched her courage with humility. The palace had begun to change in subtle ways. Council meetings were more open to discussion and collaboration, with Ethan's perspective often guiding compromise and innovation. The nobles, once wary, began to recognize the value of cross-world understanding and the strength that could come from collaboration rather than isolation. And through it all, Lyra and Ethan's bond remained steady, a quiet force that inspired those around them. One morning, as the sun rose over the floating terraces, Lyra took Ethan to the observation tower, a place where the entire palace and the surrounding landscapes were visible. Mountains, glowing forests, and rivers of light stretched into the horizon. "Look," she said softly, "all of this, the palace, the city, the lands beyond, is full of stories, history, and life. And now you are part of it." Ethan looked out over the breathtaking view, feeling a sense of responsibility and belonging he had never known. "It is overwhelming," he admitted, "but in a good way. I feel connected, like I have a place here." "You do," Lyra said, her voice gentle but firm. "Not because of who you are from, but because of who you are now. Your heart, your mind, and your choices have brought you here." Over the following weeks, the palace adjusted to the new reality. Ethan continued to learn, contribute, and grow. Lyra continued to guide him, but their relationship evolved naturally from friendship into a deep, unspoken partnership. Their trust, respect, and shared experiences strengthened both of them, creating a foundation that inspired those around them. One evening, as they walked through the central gardens, Lyra paused and looked at Ethan. "Do you realize what you have done?" she asked. Ethan blinked. I have tried my best," he said. Lyra smiled, a soft, radiant smile that touched her eyes. "You have done more than that. You have shown this palace, this world, that courage, wisdom, and kindness are not limited by species or origin. You have shown them that trust and understanding can change minds, hearts, and even history itself." Ethan felt a swell of emotion. "I never imagined that I could have this kind of impact," he admitted. "I just wanted to do right by you and by this palace." "And that is exactly why you have," Lyra said. "Actions guided by integrity are always more powerful than words alone. You have earned not just trust, but admiration, respect, and a place here that no one can take from you." As the twin moons rose, casting their silver light over the floating pools, Ethan realized that he had found more than friendship or acceptance. He had found partnership, trust, and a home in a world far from his own. Lyra, standing beside him, represented more than royalty. She embodied courage, wisdom, and the willingness to see beyond fear and tradition. Together, they had created something extraordinary, a bond that would influence not just themselves, but the future of Xiforia. The palace, with its grandeur, history, and traditions, had become a place of connection, understanding, and growth. Ethan's presence had opened new possibilities, bridging worlds with trust and mutual respect. Lyra's declaration had shifted perspectives, challenged assumptions, and inspired those around her to reconsider what truly mattered: courage, integrity, and the willingness to see others as equals. And as Ethan and Lyra stood together, side by side, watching the reflections of the moons ripple across the pools below, both knew that their story was far from over. They had faced trials, proven themselves, and built a foundation of trust that no doubt, gossip, or skepticism could shake. The future of Xiforia was bright, filled with new opportunities, understanding, and collaboration. And at the heart of it all stood Ethan and Lyra, two beings from different worlds, united by respect, trust, and a bond that transcended distance, tradition, and expectation. In the quiet of the palace gardens, with the soft hum of energy crystals and the gentle glow of floating lanterns, Ethan realized that he had found something extraordinary, a place where he was not just a visitor, but a valued part of a world filled with beauty, hope, and possibility. And Lyra, standing beside him, knew that together they could face any challenge, explore any frontier, and inspire change in ways neither had ever imagined. Their story, once uncertain, had become a testament to courage, trust, and the quiet power of understanding, a story that would ripple through Xiforia for generations to come. And as they walked back through the glowing corridors of the palace, side by side, Ethan and Lyra knew one thing with certainty: whatever the universe held, they would face it together, as partners, as equals, and as companions bound by choice, respect, and a shared vision of the future.